Mandy's one of my favourite modern films. It got lucky with having a great director, Panos, amazing cinematographer, and an awesome soundtrack from the late Johan Johansson. It's a very deep and dark looking, sounding, and of course some of the actors' performances are also on the side of dark, occultist psychopaths. I've rewatched the film a lot. It's one of the last pieces of physical media I actually bought on a sort of Blu-ray DVD level, and I can't help but notice the massive amount of parallels with video game structure and video game references. Now this is one of two things. Either Panos is a gamer and he has secretly weaved in his passion to the film, or I am just too obsessed with video game sphere that it's bled into everything else I do. If it's the latter, I think some of you guys will totally agree with these analogies. And I didn't like Google Panos's like writing ideas or theories. I looked at some of the concept art, by the way, which is absolutely awesome. I used one of it for a post. The whole film has got this great 80s amazing hand-drawn aesthetic to all of its PR and artwork before it came out. It was a great launch, and I love that distinctive pink and colour. I suppose we should talk about Cage, and Cage is having a renaissance at the moment, isn't he? Now this was right at the start of that renaissance, and as with all things, Cage couldn't hold back on just trying to kick the arse out of it, and he's just wrung it too dry. But this was a great little comeback from him, really acting on a raw level. It was raising Arizona good. You also need to see the film before watching this video. Do not watch any further. Nip off, get hold of it on Shudder. I remember seeing that as a sort of sponsored intro as well on a lot of the trailers. It's not on Shudder anymore, it's moved on. I'm not too sure what it grossed at, but it's probably on the major streaming sites. But go and buy the disc. You want the physical Blu-ray, it's totally awesome. This video is going to get ripped to shreds by the Sentinel bots, hence the reason I've got a mirrored effect on to try and throw them off the trail for this background scene. I normally do PlayStation 4 and 5 couch co-op split screen content. It's not been landing very well these last few months. I'm trying to diversify and show you guys I'm a little bit more than just a split screen video game reviewer. Please give me a like, please give this video a long view, because I just appreciate the feedback and what you guys think about this as a concept. I think establishment and setting the scene is very important in both film and video game. I can't think of a hefty single player campaign that doesn't have quite a lot of strong intro established. Maybe it's a village, maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's just like a camera zooming down onto a tranquil scene in a meadow. You know what I'm talking about. We have to make sure that the world is introduced to us as something that doesn't have anything clinically massively wrong with it. Just about every Mario or Mario game franchise has an opening where everything's hunky-dory, and then Bowser comes in and just ruins the whole damn show. It's all over story-driven campaigns. One of the bigger examples that I can think of, stuff like Ori and the Blind Forest, even older arcade games. I've just put out a video about the Snow Brothers, and it is this brilliant 16-bit tranquil piano scene, two princesses sitting on a grassy knoll, the crack of thunder and lightning, and the villain turns up. Mandy herself isn't your typical damsel. She's actually very good in The Possessor. The actress has got a lot of work off this film, and so is the older cult lady who is also in the remake of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I will not blaspheme anymore. My point is, the first act of the film very much concentrates on the investment of this character and establishes that their relationship is kind of perfect. There's no real issues with it. They are both kind of off the grid and living an isolated, ideal life, giving the perfect situation for our Bowser to rock up and ruin everything. And that brings me on to the next chapter. So our main character needs some motivation, and they certainly get that in the form of the damsel being, well, kidnapped and burned to death. That's very different to the setup with the Mario Princess Peach. He is obviously trying to get her back. She never technically has any major harm come to her, but this brings more parallels to maybe the Fallout series, particularly Fallout 3 with the death of your father.
We have never been able to successfully replicate test results.
The whole Left 4 Dead by the villains and their henchmen to sort of rot as you're tied up is probably a lot more New Vegas than it is Fallout 3, but that setup where you as the protagonist are recovering from either huge injury, you've lost all your powers, you're going from square one, is hugely popular in the video game industry. This is kind of where the cutscenes sort of end. You get control of the character, you need to go into the house and find the bottle of magic elixir in the form of Russian vodka, which Cage drinks to give him back all of his XP and health and stamina levels. So we now have an established villain, a motivation for our character. We've used up one of our quest items, and an interesting fact about this Jeremiah Sands character, Cage was originally cast for that role. Nicholas made such a fuss about wanting to play the lead, they had to find someone else, and thank God they did. But my brain does wonder how on earth Cage would have played this character.
So what you want?
It's crazy evil!
So it's time for Bill Duke and the NPCs and quest items. One of the first places that our character goes to is to collect his gear, to get his initial setup sorted. And one of the greatest expedition dumps comes from Bill's character. It's an amazing scene. I love it to bits. And the whole caravan set up with the wall out there in the middle of nowhere is brilliant. He does get his crossbow here, so everything starts to sort of work itself out. Weapon slot 1. There are no major side quests. Duke's character gives out the only main quest line, and of course it is broken down into a bunch of chunks. We're going to go through those in a second, but we now need to get to the next stage of the campaign. Just before we do that, I did want to point out that the enemy NPCs also have their quest items, one of which comes in the form of the Horn of Nebraska, I think is what it's called. It's a sacred item that when used calls in some very OP enemies. I don't think I need to point out the glaring obvious video game reference with this scene.
So what you gonna do with that thing?
I'm going hunting.
While we're still on the subject of items and weapons, did want to cover the forge and forging the axe that is very important and integral to taking out some of the special enemies at end of game. So this is definitely something we always see in just about every Dark Souls. You've got the hammer, you've got the blacksmith scenario, totally cool stuff. Mid-level bosses, mid-game bosses, smaller henchmen that lead up to the bigger fight. These are handled very well in Mandy, giving you at least 2 or 3 maybe. The fights are pretty epic and they really hark back to a lot of films previously. I'm talking like weird stuff, even like the They Live fight scene reminds me of a lot of this cooler, newer stuff. They all sort of have their own eerie location as well, and the protagonist needs to sort of creep up on them. Sometimes you can get a stealth shot. Reminds me a bit of Snake Eater with a lot of the one-on-one boss arenas that you got to within that game. There are also what I consider semi-secret NPCs, which give the protagonist key information. He also has access to the Elixir Plus, which is of course the hallucinogen in the jar that turns him into a complete lunatic. That's something we're going to look at towards endgame. I wanted to cover travelling and traversing and go into the different locations to have the different fights with the different equipment that he's opened up by going through the main quest. It's really cool how he also switches vehicle. He starts the game with his trusted 4x4, but eventually presses that Y button on one of the enemy vehicles, and the next thing you know, you're herring around on a quad. So we've made it to the main boss arena, and this isn't actually the villain of the whole scheme, but it's their biggest henchman, and that is quite familiar. Think Resident Evil 4 with that weird little kid. It's always about the muscle that gets pushed forward to you first, and then the final confrontation can sometimes be a bit of a letdown. I'll get to that in a second, but this fight is not a letdown. A lot of action film nods, a lot of horror nods, and the choreography is not bad. It's a difficult scene. I've got a tree surgeon friend that watched this with me, and they say that not all of it is that outlandish a concept. The whole scene gives me massive Splatterhouse vibes. A lot of the Act 3 give me huge early high gore arcade machine vibes. It's very cool, and put in the comments what I've missed, because there's definitely a big chainsaw finale in a video game, I'm damn sure. Before the final chapter, I want to make a quick point about transformation and the evolution of the appearance of the main character and the abilities of them as well. This is so common, getting new skins, looking bigger, looking more badass, completely reversing the way that you appeared at the start of the video game. This is so common in a lot of Far Cry games, particularly 3. You do a complete 180.
Holy fuck, this is awesome!
He graced me with his light. His hot, loving light.
So lastly, we've got the death of the main villain. A little bit anticlimactic in the film, but it doesn't really hold a candle up to the action you've been seeing prior to that, so there's no major beef. Well, one thing he does brilliantly, the cinematographer and Panos, is get these locations right and get all of this red fire, crucifixes, the symbolisms through the roof.
Addressed me as a friend. He said, Jeremiah, they were wrong.
Please let me know your thoughts on this video. It was a bit of fun, and if you're new, annotation to some of the film and TV stuff I've done already. I have finished a 4 Pillars of Modern Horror video, which was quite a big piece of work. Go and have a butcher's. I am Couch Coop. I will see you down there.